Imagine your child is just burning with a fever. It is the middle of the night, and the air in your city is, it's thick with the smell of smoke and sickness.
Yeah, a total nightmare scenario.
Right. And you hear a knock at the door, and standing there is a cloaked physician holding this simple physical remedy, something that can ease your child's breathing and, potentially save their life.
But there is a massive catch.
A huge catch. The ruling authorities, the people who basically dictate the very nature of reality in your world, they've declared that accepting this medicine is a mortal sin.
Exactly. You are told this sickness is a divine punishment.
Yeah, and to interfere with it using unauthorized man-made tools is to guarantee your child an eternity of damnation. So you have to make a choice right there in the doorway. Do you save their physical life, or do you save their eternal soul?
I mean, it is the ultimate impossible choice. And for the people living through the 14th century, that wasn't just a thought experiment, it was Tuesday.
Welcome to your deep dive. Today we are plunging into a meticulously constructed, deeply historically grounded world. We are looking at a piece of historical fiction, a short story titled Plague of Thought by Gabriel Stroup.
But we aren't just here to read a fictional narrative.
No, not at all. Our mission today is to pull up the floorboards of this story. Right? We want to examine the historical engine that really makes it run.
Because Stroup is using this medieval setting as a microcosm. He's exploring that intense friction between dogmatic authority and empirical observation.
Yeah, we are dissecting how the Black Death acted as this brutal, just unavoidable catalyst. It forced a violent collision between the rigid orthodoxy of the medieval church and the quiet but incredibly dangerous reawakening of classical scientific thought.
It's fundamentally a story about what happens when an institution demands that you simply pray away a devastating catastrophe.
But then you secretly discover that a renegade doctor, armed with nothing but a vinegar-soaked cloth and an ancient forbidden text, can actually stop the dying.
Right. And to truly grasp the gravity of that collision, we have to understand the intellectual architecture of their world.
We have to know what they believed about truth, about the universe, and really about their own minds. And Stroup sets this up brilliantly before the actual narrative even begins.
He does. He places 3 epigraphs right at the front of the text.
Yeah, these 3 historical quotes that serve as the philosophical blueprint for the whole tragedy. So the first one is from Umberto Eco's novel, The Name of the Rose.
A classic.
It reads, a monk should surely love his books with humility. But what the temptation of adultery is for laymen and the yearning for riches is for secular ecclesiastics. The seduction of knowledge is for monks.
See, Eco is pointing to a foundational piece of medieval theology here. And it's one that is very difficult for modern minds to really internalize.
Because today we view the pursuit of knowledge as just an inherent, unquestionable good.
Right, exactly. If you are curious today, you are praised. You go to the library, you fall down a Wikipedia rabbit hole, and you're bettering yourself.
Right, it's seen as a virtue.
But in the strict monastic framework of the 14th century, unchecked curiosity was literally classified as a spiritual hazard. It was deeply tied to the concept of curiositas.
Curiositas.
Yeah, which early church fathers like St. Augustine heavily warned against. Augustine actually called it the lust of the eyes.
The lust of the eyes. Wow. That implies that wanting to know how a star moves, or, I don't know, how a human heart beats, is somehow a form of gluttony.
Because the underlying premise of their reality was that the church held a total monopoly on truth, and that truth was a closed loop.
Meaning everything you needed to know was already there.
Precisely. Divine revelation had already provided everything humanity needed for salvation. The Bible, supplemented by the approved writings of the Church Fathers, that contained the complete map of the universe.
So to obsess over acquiring new knowledge, particularly secular or pagan knowledge, about the physical mechanics of the world, that was a problem.
It was a massive problem. It subtly suggested that God's revelation was insufficient. It was viewed as a form of profound intellectual arrogance.
You were prioritizing the mechanics of the mortal world over the eternal state of your soul.
Exactly. Which perfectly frames the second quote.
Right. Stroup gives us a passage from Susan Weisbauer's The History of the Renaissance World. And she focuses on the Italian poet Petrarch, writing in the 1340s.
Petrarch is a fascinating figure here.
He really is. He looks at his contemporary society and declares that they are living in an era of darkness. He recognizes that the classical learning of ancient Greece and Rome has just degraded into obscurity.
And he calls for a rebirth, what we would later call the Renaissance.
Yeah, Petrarch is essentially the guy who coined the concept of the Dark Ages.
He is. And try to imagine the psychological weight of living in 14th century Italy or France. You are walking past massive, crumbling Roman aqueducts.
Towering colosseums, right?
Exactly. Incredibly engineered roads. You are living among the physical ruins of a society that was vastly more technologically advanced than your own.
And nobody alive knows how to build those things anymore.
Nobody. The texts that explain the engineering, the mathematics, the medicine, they were lost, scattered, or locked away.
So Petrarch wasn't just lamenting a loss of good poetry. He was diagnosing a severe regression in human capability.
He was. He argued that humanity peaked in antiquity and had basically been stumbling blindly ever since.
But the people in power during Petrarch's time, they didn't see it that way at all. Which brings us to the third epigraph.
The Michael Crichton quote.
Right, from his book Timeline. It says, "The purpose of history is to explain the present. It tells us what is to be ignored or discarded. That is true power, profound power, the power to define a whole society."
This is the linchpin of the whole deep dive right here.
It really is. In the medieval world of this story, knowledge is not just neutral data.
No, it is currency. It is danger. And it is a direct threat to the established order.
Whoever controls the narrative of the past, whoever gets the absolute authority to say, this book is sacred and this book must be burned, they control the survival of the present regime.
Because to look backward to Rome or Greece, like Petrarch demanded, was to suggest that the pre-Christian pagan world had answers that the current Christian world lacked.
It was a direct existential challenge to the church's monopoly on defining reality. Let me try to put this into a modern context for you.
Oh, please do.
Okay, imagine the medieval church's doctrine as a completely locked down smartphone ecosystem. One colossal tech corporation controls the hardware, the software, the terms of service, just everything.
Right, like a walled garden.
Exactly. They only permit you to use their approved apps, and they constantly message you that their apps are the only ones that are secure. If you use anything else, your device will be completely corrupted.
I like where this is going.
So then somebody figures out how to jailbreak the phone. They start sideloading these ancient, forgotten, unauthorized apps created by a defunct company centuries ago.
And it turns out those old apps are amazing.
Right. It turns out those old apps make the battery last 10 times longer and the processor run twice as fast. Now, the dominant corporation isn't going to just say, "Oh, neat, good for you."
No, they are going to declare those old apps to be malicious viruses.
Exactly. They're going to threaten to permanently ban anyone who installs them.
Building directly on that locked ecosystem idea, the corporation in the 14th century didn't just threaten to void your warranty, they threatened to brick your device for eternity.
Excommunication.
Yes. Excommunication meant your soul was cut off from grace. And the really terrifying part is, they genuinely believed unsanctioned knowledge was a virus of the soul.
We tend to look back and assume the Inquisition and the church hierarchy were just these cynical politicians hoarding power for power's sake.
And while political preservation was absolutely a factor, many of them truly believed they were protecting the eternal souls of their flock.
Right. If a book by Aristotle leads a peasant to question divine providence, that book is a literal vector for eternal damnation.
It's a biohazard for the spirit.
I hear that, but I have to play devil's advocate for a second regarding the scholars who were doing the jailbreaking.
Okay, go for it.
If the Roman Empire collapsed, if that entire pagan civilization ultimately failed and burned to the ground, why would a 14th century intellectual think that looking backward to those specific classical texts was the key to moving forward?
That's a great question.
Because if the old operating system crashed so spectacularly, why revert to it?
Well, the scholars of the 14th century made a really crucial distinction there. They didn't view the fall of Rome as a failure of Roman science, medicine, or philosophy.
They didn't?
No. They viewed it as a political, moral, or perhaps military collapse. But the artifacts of that civilization, the writings of Galen on human anatomy, the logic of Aristotle, the geometry of Euclid, those were objectively superior to the intellectual output of the 14th century.
Okay. That makes sense.
It's like waking up in a post-apocalyptic wasteland and stumbling across a fully functional solar-powered water pump.
Right. You don't particularly care that the society that built the pump destroyed itself in a nuclear war.
Exactly. You just want to understand the mechanics of the pump so your village doesn't die of thirst today.
And thirst is exactly where Stroup drops us right into the narrative. The stage is set. We have this society where Truth is tightly policed. Curiosity is a punishable offense.
And the faint echoes of a highly advanced, lost past are just sort of whispering through the cracks.
Then the inciting incident hits. The Black Death. We're placed in a city absolutely ravaged by pestilence.
Where this theoretical academic battle for truth suddenly becomes a literal, visceral matter of life and death.
Yeah. The arrival of the plague in Europe in 1347 was an ontological shock, unlike anything in recorded history.
Oh, absolutely. It killed anywhere from 30 to 50% of the population within just a few years. Entire towns were wiped off the map.
Which is just an unfathomable level of mortality.
It is. When mortality operates on that scale, the foundational structures of society, the economy, the justice system, the religious framework, they all just buckle under the weight of the corpses.
And Stroup's imagery here is suffocating. He describes the smell of gangrene heavily masked by the burning of frankincense. The sky is choked with smoke from pyres.
It's an apocalyptic nightmare.
It really is. And standing on the steps of the cathedral, right in the center of this nightmare, is Father Theodoric.
He is a fiery Dominican inquisitor.
Yeah, and he represents the absolute, immovable bedrock of church orthodoxy. He is preaching to a terrified crowd, screaming that the plague is the physical manifestation of God's wrath.
He demands immediate repentance, blind obedience to the clergy.
And the violent purging of anyone he labels a heretic, which, happens to include unauthorized healers and marginalized communities like the Jews.
See, Theodoric's worldview relies heavily on the concept of divine punishment, which was the dominant epidemiological theory of the era.
If disease is not a biological event but a moral event, then the only cure is a moral correction.
Precisely. And when the plague hit, we saw this historical reality play out in horrific ways. The scapegoating of Jewish communities, for instance, was rampant and devastating.
Because Theodoric is harnessing the sheer, blinding terror of the populace and funneling it into a theater of obedience. He is taking a biological catastrophe and weaponizing it to reinforce the authority of the church.
But the story immediately juxtaposes Theodoric's screaming theology with something entirely quiet and empirical.
Right. We meet our protagonist, Brother Matthaeus. He is a deeply devout monk, essentially a protege of Theodoric, tasked with walking the streets and enforcing order.
But Matthaeus witnesses a scene in an alleyway that creates a permanent fracture in his worldview.
He sees two young boys lying on the cobblestones, both dying of the plague. And it's this brilliant, tragic tableau.
Over one boy, a fellow monk named Brother Ulrich is kneeling in the filth. He's praying frantically in rapid-fire Latin, holding a crucifix to the boy's forehead, begging the Almighty for mercy.
And over the second boy, there is a cloaked man, a physician named Johannes of Lübeck.
Johannes is not praying. He is not making the sign of the cross.
No, he is calmly wiping the boy's festering buboes with a cloth soaked in vinegar. And he is adjusting the boy's posture to drain fluid from his lungs.
And Matthaeus watches in stunned silence as the boy, under the physician's physical care, actually stabilizes.
His breathing eases. The fever breaks just slightly. Meanwhile, the boy, under the monk's desperate prayers, continues to choke on his own fluids and slip away.
Matthaeus is deeply disturbed by this. It shatters his expectations. He confronts the doctor.
He demands to know, you trust in these man-made fluids more than in the will of God.
And Johannes doesn't even look up. He just says, I trust in what saves. Prayer does not drain the pus nor ease the breath.
Wow. And then Johannes adds a detail that is incredibly significant. He says the sickness moves through the air as seeds.
That specific word, seeds, is the historical anchor dropping right into the text.
Because Johannes represents the quiet, dangerous survival of classical medicine. He mentions he was trained in Paris, which at the time was beginning to recover and translate ancient medical texts.
When he talks about seeds, he is referencing a highly advanced classical concept.
Long before Louis Pasteur proved the germ theory of disease in the 19th century, right?
Exactly. Ancient scholars like the Roman writer Varro and later the Renaissance physician Girolamo Fracastoro, they proposed that disease was spread by invisible particles, seeds of contagion that drifted through the air or lingered on clothing.
Let's drill down into that, because how did a 14th century doctor actually conceptualize disease if he couldn't see a bacteria under a microscope? What was the mechanical logic he was operating under?
Well, Johannes is operating primarily under Galenic medicine, mixed with the dominant theory of the day, which was miasma.
Miasma theory, that's the bad air concept, right?
Yes, miasma theory posited that diseases were caused by noxious vapors emanating from rotting organic matter, swamps, or even brought on by unpropitious astrological alignments.
And what about inside the body?
Inside the human body, Galen, who was a Greek physician from the Roman Empire, taught that health was dictated by the balance of four humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm.
Okay, so if you were sick, your humors were out of balance.
Exactly. So when Johannes uses the vinegar-soaked cloth, he isn't casting a spell.
He's applying a mechanical fix to a mechanical problem.
Precisely. Acetic acid, which is vinegar, actually has mild antiseptic properties, though of course Johann wouldn't know the word antiseptic.
Right. Under the miasma theory, strong, sharp smells were believed to cut through or neutralize the bad air.
So by applying vinegar, he is trying to create an olfactory barrier against the miasma, and simultaneously he's trying to draw out the corruption of the unbalanced humors from the boy's sores.
It is a physical intervention based on observation and ancient theory. He sees the plague not as a moral failing, but as a mechanical failure of nature that can be countered with physical remedies.
The contrast Stroup creates here is jarring. You have Johannes quietly applying vinegar based on observation, and then, just a few pages later, we witness the flagellants.
Yeah, this is where Theodoric's theology reaches its bloody zenith.
The story describes a procession of people marching through the streets, stripped to the waist, wielding leather whips tipped with iron barbs.
They are rhythmically tearing their own flesh open, bleeding onto the cobblestones, while these massive crowds cheer and weep around them.
The flagellant movement was a very real, very terrifying phenomenon during the Black Death, particularly around 1348 and 1349.
They would march from town to town, typically for 33.5 days, right, to represent the years of Christ's life.
Yes, and the logic is actually quite internally consistent if you accept their premise.
If the plague is a cosmic punishment for the sins of humanity, then humanity owes God a massive debt of suffering.
Exactly. The flagellants believed they could pay that debt themselves. They were attempting to absorb the wrath of God through their own physical torment. It was sort of extreme bloody empathy with the crucifixion.
And Father Theodoric points to this horrific procession from his pulpit and validates it. He tells the crowd, this is the price of sin and the proof of redemption.
He is taking this mass psychological breakdown and weaving it directly into the fabric of the church's authority.
Because it makes the incomprehensible legible. If God is punishing you, you have agency.
Right. You can whip yourself, you can repent, you can burn a heretic, and theoretically, the punishment will stop.
But if Johannes is right, if the plague is just invisible seeds drifting on the wind, killing the righteous and the wicked indiscriminately, then humanity has no moral agency in the matter.
We are just meat reacting to nature, and for a medieval theologian, a random, mechanical universe is vastly more terrifying than a universe ruled by an angry god.
I have to pause here, though, because I don't want to fall into the trap of just dunking on the medieval mind from the comfort of the 21st century.
That's fair.
Isn't it a bit unfair to paint Father Theodoric purely as a villain, or the flagellants as mere fanatics? I mean, in a pre-scientific world where half your neighborhood turns black and dies in the span of 3 days, wasn't attributing it to God the only rational framework available to them?
That is a crucial point of empathy.
If you don't have the language of microbiology, God's wrath makes perfect sense. It organizes the chaos.
Theodoric is operating within the only paradigm he inherited. We call it the Dark Ages, but they didn't think they were in the dark. They thought they were living in the brilliant light of divine revelation.
Right. To suggest that the plague is just a random act of nature is to remove God from the center of the human experience.
Theodoric isn't just trying to maintain political power. He is desperately trying to maintain the structural integrity of the cosmos as he understands it.
But the tragedy of this story is that Theodoric's cosmic framework has devastating intimate consequences on the ground. This abstract theological war becomes violently personal for Matthaeus.
This brings us to the emotional fulcrum of the entire narrative, the death of his sister, Clara.
The scene in the quarantine house is brutal precisely because it is so quiet. Matthaeus pushes through the doors of this rotting, overcrowded building to find his sister.
She is in the late stages of the plague. Her skin is mottled, her breathing is shallow and wet.
And standing at the foot of her cot is Johannes. The physician is there. He has his clean cloths, his fluids, his botanical tinctures. He is fully prepared to ease her breathing and potentially cool her fever.
But Clara refuses. She physically pushes Johannes away.
She's gripping a worn wooden rosary so tightly her knuckles are white. She looks at her brother and insists that no mortal physician can interfere with the will of the Almighty.
She firmly believes that accepting Johannes's medicine would be a betrayal of her faith, an insult to God.
She is waiting for a divine miracle, and in the absence of one, she accepts death. And Stroup focuses heavily on the fact that as she dies, she's reciting perfect, flawless Latin prayers.
We have to spend some time on the historical and psychological horror of that perfect Latin.
Yeah, let's unpack that.
Latin was the operating system of the institutional church. It was the language of absolute, unyielding authority.
The common people of Europe did not speak Latin in their daily lives, did they?
No, they spoke their local vernaculars. Early French, Italian dialects, Germanic tongues. The Mass was in Latin. The Bible was in Latin. To the peasantry, it was a language of magic and power, deliberately kept inaccessible.
So she is dying while speaking a language she probably doesn't even fully comprehend on a grammatical level.
Exactly. For Clara to die reciting flawless Latin demonstrates the terrifying depth to which the institutional church had penetrated her mind.
Wow.
The church hadn't just dictated her outward behavior, it had formatted the very language of her internal monologue.
Her reliance on a language she only knew as a tool of divine appeal, administered by a priesthood, shows a tragic conditioning. She has been programmed to a point of literal self-destruction.
It's heartbreaking.
It reminds me of someone today standing on the deck of a sinking cruise ship, and a rescue worker throws them a life vest.
Right.
But they refuse to put it on because they believe the CEO of the cruise line is going to magically fly down and fix the hole with a wave of his hand. They are so thoroughly committed to the authority of the institution that they reject the practical, empirical tool sitting right in front of them.
That is the tragedy of exclusivity. The indoctrinated belief that faith and practical action must be zero-sum.
Clara believes that to accept the physician's help is to actively declare a lack of faith.
The institution has taught her that reliance on the physical mechanics of the world is a betrayal of the spiritual world.
Matthaeus is utterly shattered by this. He kneels beside her body, he tries to pray, but the text says the prayers tasted of ash.
He realizes that the exclusivity of Theodoric's doctrine didn't save his sister. It actively prevented her survival.
Johannes looks at him across the cot and delivers this devastating line. He says, "Faith is no salve against lungs filled with rot."
Matthaeus needs an escape from the madness of the streets, so he retreats to the one place he associates with peace and order. He goes to the Benedictine monastery to work in the scriptorium.
The scriptorium was the copying room where monks painstakingly reproduced text by hand, right?
Yes. It was meant to be a place of quiet contemplation, a mechanical task that focused the mind on God.
But when Matthaeus sits down at his desk, the manuscript he is handed cracks his reality even further.
It's a beautiful decorative psalter, a book of psalms, but as he looks closely at the intricate swirling margins, he notices text hidden among the vines.
It's a discussion of Galen's four humors. It explicitly states, pestilence moves through the air as seed, not wrath, but nature.
And the most dangerous part isn't just the message, it's the medium. The hidden text is written in Occitan.
Occitan.
Occitan was a vernacular Romance language spoken in parts of southern France and northern Italy, and the choice of Occitan over Latin is a declaration of war.
Why? Why was writing medical theory in a local dialect considered so dangerous?
Because Latin was the firewall. If a controversial text is written in Latin, it remains trapped within the elite sphere of the educated clergy.
They can debate it behind closed doors, censor it, or destroy it without the public ever knowing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But translating classical, empirical medical theory into Occitan, the language of the baker, the blacksmith, the merchant, bypasses the firewall. It democratizes the knowledge.
If the common people can read that disease is a natural phenomenon caused by seeds, they stop believing it's a divine punishment.
And if they stop believing it's a divine punishment, they stop relying on Father Theodoric for salvation. It strips the church of its primary mechanism of control.
It's the 14th century equivalent of a whistleblower leaking classified state secrets directly to the public internet.
It really is. And the architect of this medieval WikiLeaks is a woman named Marietta.
She is the monastery's master illuminator, the artist responsible for painting the intricate details in the manuscripts and designing the stained glass windows.
Matthaeus confronts her, and Marietta doesn't even try to deny it. In fact, she shows him how deep the subversion goes.
She points to a massive stained glass window she is constructing for the cathedral. And she tells him that she is hiding Ptolemaic planetary orbits inside the golden halos of the saints.
This represents a brilliant historical reality. Monasteries were highly paradoxical environments.
How so?
Well, on the surface, they were the enforcers of church doctrine. But in their cellars and libraries, they were the primary preservers of ancient pagan antiquity. The monks copying the texts were often the only ones who knew what they said.
And as the early murmurs of the Renaissance began, artists found themselves in a unique position.
The church was their primary patron, funding massive cathedrals and artworks. So subversive artists began smuggling scientific, anatomical, or classical motifs directly into religious commissions.
We see that later with Michelangelo, right? The famous theory that he painted the shape of a human brain behind God in the Sistine Chapel, directly linking divine creation to the human intellect.
Exactly. Or Botticelli weaving pagan Neoplatonic philosophy into his religious paintings. Marietta is doing the same with astronomy.
Now, the Ptolemaic system, named after the Greco-Roman astronomer Ptolemy, was actually geocentric, placing the Earth at the center.
Yeah.
But it was incredibly mathematically complex, right?
It was. It relied on intricate geometric patterns called epicycles and deferents to explain the movement of the planets. It represented a mechanical, predictable, mathematically knowable cosmos.
But I have to stop and ask a basic logistical question about Marietta's strategy here.
Go ahead.
If you possess forbidden, heretical, astronomical data that the Inquisition would literally burn you alive for, why would you paint it into a 30-foot, brightly colored stained glass window where every single person in the city can see it?
It seems counterintuitive, I know.
Isn't that the single worst hiding spot imaginable?
It sounds absurd, but it's actually an act of psychological genius. Marietta is relying entirely on confirmation bias.
Oh, interesting.
People process visual information based on what they are conditioned to expect. When a devout, uneducated peasant or even Father Theodoric himself looks up at that window, their brain is primed to see holiness.
They see a golden circle around a figure and their brain registers. That is a holy halo representing the divine light of a saint.
They lack the geometric vocabulary to perceive the mathematical data.
Glass hides nothing, Marietta tells Matthaeus. It holds its second face in plain sight.
Right, but when an initiated scholar, someone who has read the forbidden texts, looks at that exact same window, they don't see a halo. They see the precise concentric arcs of a planetary orbit.
Marietta is planting seeds for the future.
She knows the current generation is too deeply indoctrinated, too terrified by the plague, to accept a mechanical universe.
So she encodes the data into the very architecture the church considers sacred.
She is trusting that in 50 or 100 years, a new generation will look up, decode the geometry, and realize that the truth was hanging above their heads the entire time. It is a breathtakingly patient long game.
It totally shifts Matthaeus's perspective. He realizes that resistance to Theodoric's dogmatic terror isn't just found in the open, defiant acts of the physicians in the streets.
It's also baked quietly, subversively, into the mortar of the church itself.
He realizes the medieval world isn't a monolith. And this lesson is reinforced almost immediately when Theodoric hands Matthaeus a new assignment.
The Inquisitor orders Matthaeus to go back out into the diseased streets, act as a spy, and report back on the demonic rites of the unauthorized healers.
Theodoric expects Matthaeus to find evidence of witchcraft, heresy, or perhaps Jewish conspiracies.
But when Matthaeus tracks down Johannes of Lübeck in a makeshift clinic in an alley, he doesn't find demons.
No. He finds a Franciscan friar named Brother Gabrielus working seamlessly alongside the renegade physician.
This scene is fantastic.
You have Johannes, the man of science, applying his vinegar compresses and observing the symptoms. And right next to him is Gabrielus, a man of the cloth, applying clean bandages, sweeping the filth from the floor, and offering water to the dying.
Matthaeus is stunned by the collaboration. He approaches the friar and asks, "Do you not fear Father Theodoric's censure? You are assisting a heretic."
And Gabrielus just smiles gently and replies, "Father Theodoric is rather old-fashioned."
To appreciate the subversive weight of that insult, we have to look at the micropolitics of the Catholic Church in the 14th century.
Break that down for us.
The church was composed of various religious orders, and they operated with distinct, often competing philosophies. Theodoric is a Dominican.
Okay.
The Dominican order, the order of preachers, were historically the intellectuals, the theologians, the inquisitors. They were known as the Hounds of the Lord. Their primary focus was doctrinal purity, maintaining strict theological boundaries, and aggressively rooting out heresy.
And Gabrielus is a Franciscan.
Yes. The Franciscan order was founded by St. Francis of Assisi. Their historical DNA was fundamentally different. They were focused on radical poverty, a deep, almost mystical connection to the natural world.
Seeing the physical world as a mirror of God's goodness, right?
Exactly. And most importantly, practical, hands-on charity. They were the ones washing the feet of lepers.
It's a bit like discovering that two departments within the same massive draconian corporation are running completely different operational playbooks.
That's a great analogy.
The Dominicans are the hyper-aggressive HR department. They are obsessed with the rule book, firing people for the slightest dress code violation, demanding absolute ideological purity.
And then you go down to the warehouse and you find the Franciscans.
Right. The warehouse workers don't care about the corporate memos or the mission statements issued from the top floor. They are just trying to keep the supply chain moving. They're trying to keep people fed, bandaged, and alive.
And Gabrielis articulates this integration of worldviews to Matthaeus. He says, faith and reason are two wings of the same soul. Break one, and the soul cannot rise.
Gabrielis isn't abandoning his faith in favor of Johannes' science. He is synthesizing them.
For the Franciscans in this context, doing God's work means providing tangible relief to human suffering. If the physician's empirical methods work, if the vinegar eases the breathing, then God must be working through the physician's reason and the natural properties of the vinegar.
This encounter forces a definitive choice upon Matthaeus. He realizes that if he reports Gabrielis and Johannes to Theodoric, the Inquisition will torture and execute them.
They will destroy the only people actually helping the sick.
He thinks to himself, omission was a mercy. So he walks back to the cathedral, stands before his terrifying mentor, looks Theodoric in the eye, and lies.
He submits his report, stating he found no heresy, only water and vinegar.
The historical reality embedded here is vital. We often romanticize history as a series of grand, fiery rebellions.
But the survival of knowledge and humanism during oppressive eras often didn't rely on dramatic revolutions. It relied on middle management.
It relied on individuals like Matthaeus and Gabrielis quietly turning a blind eye to strict dogma in order to facilitate practical good.
The system survived its own worst impulses because people embedded within it chose human empathy over strict ideological compliance.
And Matthaeus' choice to lie, his quiet defection, does not go unnoticed. Marietta the artist approaches him later.
She slips him a small piece of painted stained glass as a token of trust, and she invites him to see what lies beneath the surface of their society.
This leads us to the intellectual core of the story, the descent into the crypt of ancients.
This sequence is where all the philosophical and historical threads violently converge.
Matthaeus follows Marietta down a spiraling stone staircase, deep into the damp, lightless crypt beneath the monastery. It smells of dust and old parchment.
And there, spread out on a massive stone slab illuminated by candlelight, are the forbidden manuscripts, the vault of the lost world.
He sees texts by Aristotle, medical treatises by Galen, fragments of Lucretius, and incredibly, manuscripts written in Arabic and Sanskrit.
The physical presence of these texts in a dark medieval cellar feels so heavy. The author chose these specific names and languages to ground the narrative, right?
Let's take Lucretius, for example. Why is a fragment of Lucretius sitting in a crypt such a volatile object?
Well, Lucretius was a Roman poet and philosopher who wrote an epic poem called De Verum Natura on the nature of things.
Historically, this text was famously rediscovered in a German monastery in 1417 by a book hunter named Poggio Bracciolini.
Its rediscovery fundamentally shifted the trajectory of Renaissance thought. Lucretius argued for an atomistic universe.
He proposed that everything in existence is made up of tiny, indivisible particles, atoms moving and colliding in an infinite void.
And why would a universe made of bouncing atoms be so terrifying to Father Theodoric?
Because an atomistic universe functions without the constant, active intervention of a deity, it removes teleology.
The idea that everything happens for a specific divine purpose.
If the world operates via the mechanical collision of particles, then lightning isn't God expressing anger, it's just friction.
A plague isn't a divine punishment for sin, it's just the mechanical transmission of biological particles.
If the universe runs like a clockwork machine on its own natural laws, the Church loses its role as the necessary mediator between humanity and the cosmos.
And the inclusion of the Arabic and Sanskrit texts, how did a medieval European monk even get his hands on those?
That detail is a crucial acknowledgement of the true transmission of knowledge. We often talk about the Renaissance as Europe simply waking up and remembering Greece and Rome.
But during the centuries when Europe was mired in the early Middle Ages, suffering massive intellectual decline, it was the Islamic Golden Age that preserved, translated, and heavily expanded upon classical knowledge.
In centers of learning like the House of Wisdom in Baghdad or later in places like Toledo in Spain, Islamic and Jewish scholars were translating Greek texts into Syriac, then into Arabic.
Adding their own monumental discoveries in algebra, optics, and medicine, figures like Avicenna and Averroes kept the flame of Aristotle and Hippocrates burning.
The European Renaissance relied heavily on receiving its own lost heritage back through the meticulous cosmopolitan scholarship of the Islamic and Eastern worlds.
So standing around this stone slab of world-altering texts are the key players of the resistance. Matthaeus, Johannes the physician, Marietta the artist, and a new character, Sir Anselm.
Anselm is a scarred, heavily armored, deeply disillusioned knight who has bled for the church in various crusades. And a massive, intense debate erupts over what to do with his hidden knowledge.
It's a debate over the ethics of revolution. We have three distinct strategies represented.
Johannes, the empirical scientist, wants total transparency. He argues that the knowledge must be shared openly and immediately.
He says if plague comes from seeds in the air, then the truth must spread like seed as well.
Marietta the artist advocates for the long game. She wants to keep hiding the knowledge in art and metaphor, slowly educating the populace until society is capable of handling the truth without tearing itself apart.
And then there is Sir Anselm. He looks at the carnage in the streets above. He sees the staggering hypocrisy of Father Theodoric burning books and allowing people to die agonizing deaths just to maintain his grip on power.
Anselm's solution is immediate, violent, kinetic rebellion. He wants to gather his loyal men, draw his broadsword, march up to the cathedral, and literally butcher the inquisitors. He wants to tear the oppressive system down by force.
Anselm represents the righteous fury of the oppressed.
I have to say, looking at the situation, I kind of want to champion Sir Anselm's argument. Look at what is happening.
It's hard not to.
Children are drowning in their own infected lungs because the authorities have criminalized medicine. The church is actively torturing and whipping people in the streets.
Yeah.
If an institution is that violently oppressive, that actively murderous, isn't Anselm's violent rebellion actually the most moral response? Why should they wait for Marietta's stained glass to be decoded by scholars in 100 years when innocent people are dying today?
It is a profoundly compelling, visceral argument. You feel the raw justice in Anselm's anger. If a system is inherently toxic, destroy the system.
Right.
But the expert in the room, Johann, provides the counter-argument that history has tragically proven true time and time again. Johann looks at the knight and says, if you burn the house to rid it of sickness, you bury the living with the dead.
Wow. You bury the living with the dead.
Violent revolution is a blunt, indiscriminate instrument. Johannes is asking Anselm to look at the reality of war.
If Anselm incites a bloody, chaotic uprising in the streets of a plague-ridden city, what happens to the fragile, irreplaceable manuscripts sitting on that stone slab?
They get burned in the crossfire. What happens to the vulnerable, sick patients Johannes is trying to treat in the alleys? They get trampled by soldiers.
War destroys the very infrastructure of knowledge, care, and stability that they're trying to liberate.
Johannes is arguing that replacing the church's violent, dogmatic authoritarianism with a secular, violent, revolutionary dogmatism doesn't actually cure the disease. It just changes the name of the executioner.
Johannes calls it Pyrrhic ruin, a victory so devastating it equals defeat. But this incredibly high-minded theoretical debate in the crypt is about to be dragged violently into the daylight.
Because the climax of the story hits, and Father Theodoric forces Matthaeus' hand.
The Inquisition finally catches up. Father Theodoric's men raid the makeshift clinics and drag Johannes of Lübeck onto a public platform in the center of the city square.
The sky is dark with smoke, the crowd is terrified, and they chain the physician to a post.
Theodoric's guards smash Johannes' glass vials, his botanical tinctures, his medical instruments. They're just grinding the tools of science into the dirt.
And Theodoric, wanting to cement his absolute psychological control over orders his trusted protege, his investigator, to stand before the crowd and publicly condemn the physician as a heretic.
The psychological pressure on Matthaeus in this exact moment is suffocating. Stroup describes the silence of the crowd.
Matthaeus is standing there looking at Johannes in chains, looking at the smashed vials of medicine, and looking at Theodoric's armored knights waiting for his word.
The mechanics of authoritarianism are on full display here.
The regime doesn't just want to punish the dissenter. They want the moderate, respected insider to validate the punishment.
If Matthaeus condemns Johannes, he secured his own safety within the hierarchy. He survives.
But he murders his own conscience. He betrays everything he learned in the crypt, and he validates the system that killed his sister Clara.
And this is where Matthaeus finally, irrevocably, breaks the chain. He looks at Theodoric, looks at the crowd, and he refuses.
He raises his voice and shouts, "I cannot indict him. His knowledge preserves life. I will not condemn that which God may yet spare."
The sheer bravery of that specific action is incredible. It's one thing to disagree privately in a dark cellar. It's one thing to quietly omit the truth on a bureaucratic report.
But when forced to actively participate in the public machinery of oppression, Matthaeus jams the gears in front of everyone.
And the moment he speaks those words, the fragile tension snaps and chaos completely consumes the square.
Theodoric, enraged by the public defiance, orders the guards to seize them all.
But Sir Anselm and his loyal knights have infiltrated the crowd. They draw their weapons and attack the inquisitors. A bloody melee breaks out.
In the confusion, Anselm's men cut Johannes free. Marietta grabs Matthaeus by the habit, and the revolutionaries plunge back into the cathedral, heading for the crypt.
They grab as many of the ancient manuscripts as they can carry, the Lucretius, the Galen, the Arabic texts, and they flee deeper into the subterranean dungeons beneath the city.
The imagery of this escape is intensely symbolic. They are sprinting through the dark, damp foundations of the cathedral, the very bedrock of the institutional church.
Theodoric's heavily armored knights are pursuing them with torches. As they reach a narrow choke point in the tunnels, Anselm and Matthaeus use heavy wooden beams to strike the support pillars.
They literally bring down the stone foundations of the tunnel, collapsing the ceiling and blocking the pursuing inquisitors under tons of rubble.
The old order is physically and metaphorically collapsing behind them, sealing them off from the city.
The author titles this climactic section, Metastasis.
Now, traditionally, metastasis is a terrifying medical term. It describes a cancer that has broken away from its primary site and is spreading uncontrollably through the bloodstream to infect the rest of the body.
But Stroup flips the definition entirely. In the context of this ideological war, the church views empirical science and classical thought as a cancer.
Theodoric tried to excise the tumor of heresy by arresting Johannes. But by forcing the issue, by initiating the violence, the church caused the ideas to metastasize.
The knowledge has escaped the containment of the city walls. It is now spreading outward, unstoppable.
The surviving characters navigate the dark, collapsed tunnels until they finally see a faint glow ahead. They emerge from the darkest of the subterranean dungeon into a sunlit ancient forest far outside the city walls.
The visual contrast is profound. They leave the smoke, the incense, the blood, and the screaming of the plagued city behind, and they step into the dappled golden light of the forest canopy.
They find an abandoned, overgrown stone chapel, and they establish a new sanctuary, a new order.
This ending in the sunlit forest serves as the historical seed of the Renaissance.
It beautifully, poignantly illustrates how humanism and the rebirth of classical learning did not begin in the established centers of power.
The Renaissance wasn't mandated by a king or a pope. It bloomed on the absolute fringes of society. It survived in exile.
Preserved by renegades, subversive artists, dissenting scholars, and rogue physicians. It grew quietly in the woods until it was strong enough generations later to return and overtake the center of civilization.
The story ends with this gorgeous, hopeful vision. Years later, in the forest sanctuary, children are seen tracing complex, Ptolemaic planetary orbits in the dirt with sticks, right alongside their daily prayers.
Faith and reason, the two wings of the soul, finally coexisting without destroying each other. What a monumental journey.
It really is.
Let's zoom out and pull all of this together. We have traversed the grim, ash-choked streets of Gabriel Stroup's Plague of Thought. We've explored how the author utilized the very real historical horrors of the Black Death as a crucible.
The plague forced the painful, violent transition from the rigid, monopolistic dogma of the medieval era to the quiet, empirical dawn of the Renaissance.
We witnessed how ancient knowledge survived not because massive institutions allowed it to, but because brave individuals risked everything to preserve it.
It survived through the empirical courage of physicians like Johannes observing the physical world. It survived through the brilliant, patient subversion of artists like Marietta hiding the cosmos in stained glass.
And perhaps most importantly, it survived through the agonizing moral defection of the system's own enforcers, like Matthaeus, who chose the preservation of human life over adherence to an outdated theology.
And here is why this deeply historical dive matters to you, the listener, right now, today.
We obviously don't live under the jurisdiction of a medieval inquisition. No one is going to drag you into a public square and burn you at the stake for reading a biology textbook or studying an atomistic universe.
But the core mechanics of this story, the battle over who gets to control information, what is officially labeled as the truth, and how we balance our reliance on massive, powerful institutions with our own independent critical thinking.
That tension is just as relevant today as it was in the 14th century.
Absolutely. We're constantly surrounded by vast technological and political institutions that want to define reality for us.
They want to curate our digital feeds, shape our historical narratives, and tell us precisely what information is safe and what is dangerously unauthorized.
The temptation to let an authority figure, whether it's an algorithm, a corporation, or a politician, do our complex thinking for us, is a deeply human vulnerability.
Especially when we are faced with global crises that terrify us. We still crave the comfort of a simple, legible explanation, even if it's wrong.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to carry into your day.
Think about Marietta. Think about her artistic subversion, patiently hiding the mathematical truth of the cosmos inside the golden halo of a saint.
I want you to look around at the media, the architecture, the technology, or the popular art you consume every single day.
What hidden truths, what deeply subversive ideas, or what quiet seeds of future knowledge are being baked into our modern stained glass windows right now? What paradigm-shifting reality is sitting in plain sight, just waiting for a future generation to finally decode it?
It is a profound question. It serves as a reminder that truth is incredibly resilient. Even when the diagnostic waters are murky, the truth survives.
Because sometimes, when the official diagnostic machine is broken, and the authorities are demanding that you ignore the evidence of your own eyes, you have to be willing to look closer, trust the quiet voice of reason, and step out of the dark. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning.